Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had an encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's guest is Jay. Jay, welcome to the show.
Hey, Vic.
Jay, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Okay. I grew up part of my life in Tennessee and the other part in Florida. Went in the Army when I was 17. I got out of the Army in the mid-90s and wound up going to work overseas for a contractor. Worked overseas for about 10 years and came back to the States and decided to go to engineering school at the university, and that's how I wound up back in Florida in Gainesville.
We were talking about all the things you've done in your life. You're younger than I am, and I was sitting there listening to you talk about all the things that you have done, and I'm thinking, wow, this man here, he's lived his life. You've done so many impressive things.
Well, that or a really good liar.
Oh, that's funny. Before we talk about the encounter you and your wife had, please tell the listeners about the conversation you overheard when you were a kid growing up in Tennessee that has possible ties to a dogman.
Okay. We discussed this earlier and didn't cross my mind until you brought up some issues in that area. When I was growing up, this was the early 80s, I do remember my grandfather and father having a conversation. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and I do remember specifically it involving what they said was a bear attack on a couple that was in an RV. And it must have been bad. And this was brought up, the discussion was between my father and grandfather, so I know something happened. Now, exactly what they were talking about, I don't know, but it just seems kind of odd how they were discussing this about the same time that something that supposedly did happen up in that area. But they always said bear attack, not dogman, not anything else. It's specifically bear attack.
For the listeners, so that you know, the area where he grew up was pretty close to the LBL, so apparently that's the area where they're talking about this quote-unquote bear attack happening. That's pretty eerie. After you had your encounter, did you hear about anyone else having encounters with dogmen in the area where your encounter happened?
In Florida, not after. I did do a little research, and I had never heard of dogman or anything like this in my life. And I didn't really know what this thing was, what to even be searching for. Naturally, the size, I'm thinking Sasquatch or Bigfoot, something that big, but I knew it didn't look like what you would expect a Sasquatch to look like, but that was the only, I guess, reference I had to even start looking for things like this. So I did do a search on, I believe it was BFRO. I think that was the name of the organization that records sightings of Sasquatch. And for that part of Florida, there had only been 3 Sasquatch sightings. One was very far out in the prairie, which is 30-some miles from where we lived on the other end of Gainesville. And there was one, however, in 1985 that had been reported by a psychology professor about 200 yards from the ranch. He didn't describe it in great detail. He didn't get a great look at it. Did he see a Sasquatch? Did he see what we've seen? I don't know. But he's seen something really big, and it was broad daylight when he seen it. So it did kind of make the hair on the back of my neck stand up when I found this report. And this was, mind you, 20-some years earlier than when we had seen what we seen that evening. So there has been a history of things being seen in the area. However, prior to us seeing this, a truck driver who's driving for Conway in the area, this man had been maybe 15, 20 miles up the road from the ranch late at night. I believe it was after midnight, picking up, I believe it was a natural gas shipment, or it may have been a 6-oil shipment. I'm not sure which one, but it was gas and it was dangerous stuff. And they obviously stored it, they have a depot out there and store it outside of city limits, but he had to go out and he had to pick up a shipment there. And it was very late. He had to wait for the depot manager to come and I guess let him in and fill up the truck or whatever. And on his way into that facility. It's on the periphery, I guess, of the Okefenokee Wildlife Refuge, this big swamp and wooded area out there. And on the way into the depot, he's seen something very large. He said bipedal leap across the road in front of him. He thought he had hallucinated and had pulled his truck into the depot, and he was sitting there waiting. And he said he had his window down, was having a cigarette or whatever, was waiting for the depot manager to show up. And he said he heard what he described was the most god-awful roar, like yell. He said he didn't know any animal itself that could have made a sound like that. He said when he heard that, he rolled the windows up. He said, and I do remember him saying specifically he would not have felt safe if he had had a machine gun. And he was very upset when the, I guess, depot manager showed up to let him in, and depot manager didn't want to be there. Just, there was something weird going on in the area. Obviously, he'd seen it. When he told me this story, I kind of giggled about it and didn't take it too seriously, even though it's coming from somebody that otherwise is a pretty serious person and wouldn't make stories like that up. But I thought maybe he just misidentified something. I thought maybe it's a bear and maybe he thinks he heard this or whatever. But after what me and my wife seen, you know, I started thinking back on that as well, thinking, oh, that's pretty close. Maybe he's seen the same thing we've seen.
Yeah, it's possible. And I'll bet he was upset when he was sitting there waiting for that depot manager to come. That had to be the longest wait of his life.
Oh, yeah, that was one of the things he said. I mean, he did say he wouldn't have felt safe with a machine gun, but he made it clear that they weren't allowed to carry firearms anyways with them in the trucks. So, you know, he's completely defenseless. He said he didn't even have a pocket knife.
That had to be awfully hard to deal with. All right, Jay, let's talk about this encounter you had. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay, this was in the beginning of April 2010, so it was early spring. We had been living on the ranch. We'd been brought in there while I was in school at the university. We'd been brought in by the family that owned the ranch. They brought us in to kind of keep an eye on the place. They had problems with poachers and other things like this. And it was a big ranch. That was their method of, I guess, maintaining the place. They only gave the house to people that were either law enforcement or people that were in the military or had been prior in the military and had security experience. So the couple that were living in the ranch house prior to us had moved out. It had been a deputy sheriff and his wife, who was in medical school. They did move from the ranch. So we had moved in there, been living there maybe a little over a month, and everything was going fine. We would walk my wife's dog. It was a Schnauzer little dog. Couldn't just let it out the door because there were coyotes out there, bobcats. There's lots of hogs, things like this, and this is a small dog that's going to run off. So we had to keep him on a leash, and every evening after dinner before we went to bed, I would take the dog, put him on a leash, and I'd walk him along the cattle fence right in front of our house, maybe 25 feet from the house, and just walk him along the fence line and let him do his business, and we would come back inside. So that is where we had our encounter. We'd been eating dinner and walked out the front door. I believe I was in front of my wife. Matter of fact, I know I was, but we did let the screen door slam. I was real good about that, so I made the noise, usually scare off, you know, anything that might otherwise attack you out of fear, you know, bobcats, stuff like that. I made the loud noise, usually would scare that kind of stuff off. So we did slam the screen door. We're coming down the steps, and my wife was behind me, but we got up to the fence line. I carried, at that time, 1 million lumen Coleman, like mini lantern, you know, spotlight type deal. I carried it and used it while I was walking the dog, you know, just checking the woods, you know, keep an eye out for anything. So I carried that as well as a 45 in a shoulder holster, and, you know, that was kept, you know, just for security reasons. Again, we did have poachers out there. There had also been an order to kill any hogs on site. They were causing a lot of damage on the ranch and some of the farming area. So, you know, those orders were there as well. So I did carry it for that reason. But anyways, we were walking the dog up in front of the house, and I was talking to my wife over my shoulder, And I don't know why, I just clicked the button on the spotlight and kind of fanned it to the right of me. And when I fanned it over in that direction, that's when we seen it. It was right there. I mean, I could not believe what I was seeing. It was, less than 50 feet from us. It was standing by the large oak tree and the flower bed that sat on the right side of the house over there. It was standing right next to that. The light caught it dead on, right in the face. I didn't know how to process what I was seeing. The head, it was the biggest head that I thought I had ever seen on any living thing, in my life, up close and in person. The eyes were just shooting, right at me. It was unbelievable. They were a orange yellow color, real deep. And, I remember, kind of, again, trying to figure out, what do I do? In my head, what is this? I screamed back at my wife. She's behind me, and I said, "Are you seeing this?" And she says, "Yes, I'm seeing it." And she's starting to cry, not cry, but she's, startled. And she's crying back, "Yes, let's get inside now," and she's done took off running back to the front porch. And I'm backing up, but I'm keeping the light on it while I'm backing up with the dog, trying to get back to the porch. I mean, going for the 45, that didn't even cross my mind. This thing was so big that the last thing I was thinking about at that point was my ability to shoot it. It was so close. I didn't think I could have got the 45 out in time to shoot the thing anyways. And as I just knew, keep the light on it, back up. I'm terrified at what I'm seeing. And as I'm backing up, the thing starts, this is what scared me to death. The thing crouches down on two legs. As big as it was, crouches down, and it's focused right on me the whole time. So I finally get to the porch. I slam the screen door, lock it, not that it would have done any good. My wife's already inside. I get inside and I start screaming at her. I turn off all of the lights. The house we lived in was an antique farmhouse that had been put on that property 30 years before, I don't know. And it had been renovated. That was part of the deal when we moved in, is we couldn't add anything or do anything inside the house because it wasn't antique. All the glass was antique, which was bad because the glass is paper thin, but I believe we counted 16 windows in the house. So, when you're living out on a ranch and there's nobody around you for several miles, you just got woods. You don't really care about your privacy too much. But for this evening, it was really scary because the whole house was just ringed in windows. And it was these flimsy, antique windows. There were no blinds to pull, no drapes, no nothing. So I get inside and I just start screaming at my wife. I'm like, "Cut all the lights off." She's like, "What?" I said, "Shut every light off. I'm going into defensive mode here, like we're under attack." And I start panicking a little, but try to keep myself calm. And we start flipping the lights on. I screamed at my wife. I said, "Get the floodlights in the back that been cut on." We had a total of 8 floodlights that ringed the house. There were 2 floodlights on each corner of the home, and they were 150 watts. So we had her cut on the back floodlights. So I cut on the floodlights in the front. And at that point, I'm trying to fumble around in the dark, just clicking the trigger on the light, trying to get to my shotgun and get my M4 Type AR-15 out, and I'm trying to get them loaded. I kept number 4 buckshot tactical loads and the shotgun out there for rattlesnakes. We had a lot of rattlesnakes, and there was a possibility that I'd go run off a poacher or something. That's what I took. I knew what I seen, that wasn't going to do it. I get a box of double-up buck and some slugs, and I start loading that in the shotgun. And even that, I would have been afraid shooting at this thing with that at too far of a range. I got my AR-15 out. I got a little light on it hooked up, and I did get a magazine in, and I felt a little more comfort because I assumed at that point, okay, we're inside. If it is coming for us, it's going to be coming from the light to the dark. I've got the dark on my side, and if it does manage to get into a window, while it's getting into the window, I thought at least with the M4, if I can pop it a few times right in the head. That should put it down regardless of how big it is. That was my thinking at that moment. So my wife's crying at this point. She has started crying, actually. And she's freaking out. I want to leave. I want to leave. And I knew, that was a bad idea. We had 3/4 of a mile to drive to get back up to the main gate. And then we had a security gate that would take, a good 30 seconds to open itself. Obviously, something this big, we weren't going to outrun it in the car, trying to get in the car and get away. We had even had deputy sheriffs in the past that had come out on the ranch for other things, make that comment about how far back we were. So I knew we weren't getting out of there in the car that night, and we were just going to have to wait it out and sit. So I'm trying to calm her down, and we, like I said, got all the lights off inside, and we just sat there. We knew where it was standing. It had been standing over at that large oak tree, and I believe that it had been watching us that evening through that window, eating dinner. It knew, it knew we were coming outside. It heard us. It wasn't afraid. It didn't try to run off. It had actually been standing there watching us. So anyways, we sat there in the dark for the rest of the evening, and we did not, or I didn't feel comfortable until the sun started coming up a little after 5 in the morning. Once lights started breaking, I waited until I could see well enough out there, and I went back out on the porch and started looking around. I wanted to see if I could, I could see the thing still there. Obviously, at this point, it was gone. But it was a long night. That went from, it's probably 9:30, 10 o'clock till after 5 a.m. the next morning. So, it was a long night of sitting there. You know this thing's out there and you can't see it. It was an experience that really did change me.
I think that would change anyone, and I'll bet that was a long night. Wow. You think that Dogman was waiting for you to get further from your house before it made a move on you. Why do you think that?
Well, I think it had been watching us, and it may have been watching us prior to that night. It may have been watching us for days prior to this, and knew the routine, knew what we were doing, and it knew I was walking the dog down that fence line. So if I had walked up just, maybe 30, 40 more feet from where I was at when I hit it, if I had walked straight up the fence line like I normally do, because I would walk that section of the fence. The cattle fences, we have the pastures and parts of the forest off in grids. So I would walk this one grid line of fence, and where it was at that tree, if I'd walked 30 more feet up that fence line like I normally did with the dog, it would have been at a 90-degree angle, a 90-degree angle to me, and I wouldn't have seen it at all, and it could have just snatched near the dog right there, and I would have not seen what was coming. It would have been that close and at that kind of an angle. So it's definitely a place where, if I was in the Army, that's where I'd expect an ambush. So, to me, it screamed ambush. And, after talking with you, think maybe that's not what it was doing, but it's what it appeared to me. Strictly from, a tactical point of view, it appeared to me like it was waiting for an ambush.
Ew. When you and your wife were looking at that Dogman, what was your dog doing, do you know?
Dog didn't make a noise, didn't bark, and I've got a shepherd, growing up as a kid, we had Rhodesian Ridgebacks. I've been a dog person my whole life, so I know what the type of dogs make noise, and adult schnauzers are the type of dogs that bark a lot. And my wife's dog, it was a real pain in the neck sometimes with how much barking it would do. It would bark at anything, and the slightest little noise or smell or whatever, and, it'd set it off. But it did not bark, didn't make a sound. It acted probably more confused than we were. I remember when I was pulling it with the leash, it was expecting to go do its business, and it didn't get to go on its normal walk. So I'm having to pull them as I'm going backwards back up to the porch. The dog did not make a sound.
Well, you never really know how a dog's going to react. Sometimes dogs will go nuts, absolutely apoplectic. Other times they cower and don't make a sound, so you never really do know how they're going to respond.
He did mark his territory on the porch. This would drive us nuts. You know, when he would smell other animals getting around the area, he would go and he would pee on the corners. The porch was a big tongue-and-groove wood plank porch that ran 360 degrees around the house. You know, this was an antique cracker house. That's what they call them down here, cracker homes. And the dog would pee on all four corners of the porch deliberately, you know, for that reason. But no, he did not make any noise or do anything like that night.
I'm glad he didn't go nuts. Did the dogman ever seem to notice your dog was there?
He would have had to. I mean, he was watching me and the dog. That's the thing. I mean, I think this thing was waiting in ambush. That's what it appeared to me to be doing. I think it had probably seen me walking the dog prior to this, so it definitely knew the dog was there.
Oh, I'm sure it knew it was there, but sometimes people have a dog with them and the dogman's just locked on the person, not the dog, so I didn't know when all this was going on if the dogman ever glanced at the dog from what you saw or if it just stayed locked on you.
All I seen was the eyes, and the eyes were focused right on, I mean, obviously it was focused on me because I had the spotlight, but, you know, it felt like it was staring right into my eyes.
Yeah, that's pretty typical. You were amazed by the size of it. How big was that dog man?
Hard to say. I've heard the 7-foot tall reports. I don't know. It's over 6 foot. This thing was really big and, I mean, just massive. Best way to describe it. Where it was standing at that tree, the tree is raised up slightly on a little hill. So there is a depression right behind the tree, and that's where the dogman was standing when we seen it. So from what me and my wife judged, it looked like it had to be well over 6 feet tall.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was. How good of a look did you get at its leg structure?
Not a good look. That's the one thing. I know it was bipedal. It had to be. Nothing that big on 4 legs. It had to be bipedal because when it crouched, you know, it was a real crouch. It looked like a big person start to crouch down, but a lot of the legs were blocked from view because, again, there was a slight depression behind the tree, and I guess I was slanted downwards towards it, and there was that slight depression, and then, you know, there was some flower bushes around the tree, and that did block portions below the thigh area, I guess.
Okay, that makes sense. Your dog Nora was outside with you one night recently. That caused you and your wife to talk about the dogman you saw. What did you talk about?
Yeah, this was prior to me contacting you. Me and my wife had not ever discussed in detail the dimensions of this thing that we seen. We just didn't do it. We would always kind of, that thing we've seen, you know, nervously and brush it off. And I'd never really grilled her on it because I knew it scared her so bad that I didn't want to upset her usually in the conversation. But we were out back, and Nora, our German Shepherd, was out in the yard, and, you know, she's maybe 15, 20 feet from us the other night. And we had the back porch light on, and you could catch some of the eye shine from Nora at that distance. You got the outline of the head and everything else. And I went ahead and brought it up to my wife, and I said, you know, that thing we've seen. Of course, she already, I don't want to talk about it. I'm like, yeah, well, I've been wondering how big you would say that head was compared to Nora's head. Because secretly, I had already made the determination that what I seen had to be at least 3 times the size of our German Shepherd's head. That's how big it was. But I didn't want to say that to her, so I just told her, I said, do you think that it was bigger than her head 2 times maybe? And she said, oh, no. It was at least 2.5 times, maybe even bigger. So I knew when she said that, yeah, we definitely seen the same thing. It wasn't a hallucination. It was huge, and it was probably about that size, about 3 times the size of German Shepherd's head.
That's awfully big. What feature did the dogman have that shook you up most?
I'm going to say head. The head and the eyes, those two features together. I mean, it was, the head was massive. It was, predator's head. The eyes were, I don't know, there was something supernatural about the eye shine. They weren't glowing in the dark or anything, but when that Coleman spotlight hit it there, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. I mean, I've eye shined deer, cows, hogs, you name it. I've seen eye shine from everything. I can identify animal eye shine pretty well. Bears, bobcats, anything in that area. Coyotes, you catch their eye shine. There's nothing like that. And that was the unsettling thing to me, was the eyes.
Yeah, their eyes will leave an impression on you. What color did you say that Dogman was?
That was the thing, because I was so scared when I seen it that you second guess yourself about what you're seeing. And I had never been certain. I knew it was dark. I knew it was a dark color. I thought, could it possibly have had some brown splintered in there? You're trying to find some way to rationalize what you're seeing, but I knew it was dark, and I secretly thought it was gray. When me and my wife started discussing it, she got a better look at it than I did at that point when she had to go back up into the house on the porch. Well, I still had it illuminated with the spotlight. She's going indoors, so she got a much better look at the actual color. Had time to process it all, maybe. She described a similar thing. Gray is what it was, a dark gray color.
More so than gray, they're reported as being black in color, but people ask what color dogmen can be, and I always tell them it would appear they can be any color a timber wolf can be, so it really runs the gamut.
This wasn't gray like a timber wolf. It was a dark gray. That's why we were saying we're having trouble with deciding, could it have possibly been black? I thought maybe it's brown. Would brown do that? But no, it was a dark gray. Very dark.
Well, with those lighting conditions, it's going to be hard to know for sure what color it was, so that's understandable. When you, your wife, and your dog made it back into the house, was your dog going nuts or was she pretty calm?
The dog was confused. It wasn't barking. I don't remember it going crazy or anything like that. Maybe growling, and it might have been, it was a grouchy dog. Ben was a good dog, but he was kind of grouchy. He was maybe growling at us for dragging him in. I don't know. As far as barking at whatever was out there, no, it wasn't doing that.
That's good. I'm glad he stayed calm. You believe the previous tenants of that ranch had seen that Dogman too. Why do you think that?
Well, when we got brought in, we'd read the rules, what the owners expected, the security bid, all that. I had asked because we were responsible for paying for the utilities, something we had to pay for. And I remember asking them utility price. In that part of Florida, in the city, utilities were very expensive. But if you went just outside the city limits in the county area, a lot of Florida is covered by Florida Power and Light. Their rates are a lot cheaper. This was a separate company, however, that was providing utilities in that area. So I asked them about the utility bill, and they told us, and, it wasn't very high compared to what we had already been paying in the city, but it's still pretty high. And, I said, wow, that's not as cheap as I thought it was going to be. And the owner said, well, that deputy sheriff and his wife, he would be gone in the evenings, and she refused to sleep out there without the floodlights on each corner of the house. The time when he told me that, I kind of giggled, and thought, well, what are they doing out here to begin with? If she's that afraid of, the dark, they don't need to be on a cattle ranch out in the middle of nowhere with nobody around them. It didn't really cross my mind until after we seen this thing, and I really started thinking about it again. This was somebody that had finished medical school and I believe was in residency at that time. This was a medical doctor and a deputy sheriff that probably had a lot of experience living out, in sticks themselves, or else they wouldn't took the house to begin with. This is a rational, scientifically minded woman. I really found it hard to believe that they were wanting to pay that kind of money to have those floodlights on, and you just wouldn't do that unless there was something else going on. And after we seen this thing that evening, it hit me, they had probably seen this thing as well, and that's probably why they left. it was run 8 times 150 watts. You run 8 floodlights all night long. That can start running you some pretty serious electric bills, which is not what you want when you're in medical school. So I would say she was doing it for a reason, and I believe personally that was the reason.
Yeah, if you have that many lights out there, that will make your meter spin.
Yeah.
Did you ever try to contact them to see if they actually had seen it?
No, I wouldn't have dared done something like that at that time.
If you would have contacted them, who's to say they wouldn't have denied it anyway, even if they had?
If someone had asked me and my wife during that time, we would have as well. We would not have admitted what we've seen.
Yeah, a lot of people would have done it that way. Did you ever tell the landlord about what you had seen that night?
No, that was part of the reason why we kept our mouth shut for 6 years and didn't say anything. This is a very well-known family, especially in that part of the state, but statewide, involved in politics and other things. I would have not wanted any repercussions if they thought we were crazy or causing them problems. So the last thing that I would have done is told them exactly what we've seen. I believe at that time it would not have been good for my career, my wife's career. I just wouldn't have wanted that floating around from them. It wouldn't have been a good idea.
Yeah, I can see why you didn't share it then. After having that experience, you did several things to try and protect yourselves. What kinds of things did you do?
Okay. After the first night, we knew that no one would believe a word we said if we told them what we'd seen. They'd swear to God that, we had lost our minds or else we'd misseen something. And I knew we hadn't misseen anything. And I was terrified. This thing appeared to be stalking our home, and it's coming right up to that tree. And that blind spot, it was just outside the range of the floodlights from the corners of the house. So I got the idea. I thought, okay, we'll go and we'll get some staked floodlights. These are, little floodlights you can stake, push down on the ground on a stake and run an electrical cord. And you can click them on in the evening. I thought, I'll light up that tree in that bush area. And that way, if this thing tries to come back up, or if I think there's something up in the area, I'll just flip the lights on. And, I should be able to see pretty clear. At that point, there's floodlights down there. So we bought that. We did buy some camera equipment, some security camera equipment. We had set that up because I thought, it'd be better to be recording all the perimeter around the house, everything going on here in the evenings. And, this was going to be our only way to prove to anybody that something was going on. This is what we've seen. We've got it on video. I was convinced that I could do that. So I went and got all of this stuff the following day. And, we did have kind of a eyebrow raised when we were picking up some of the video equipment. And, one of the people there mentioned, well, what are you guys so afraid of? And you can't tell them. And, this person, well, I think I'm going to keep watching the news. Maybe, I'll see some of your video on the news, making jokes like, what did you see? Did you see Sasquatch? I don't know why the person was doing that. But anyways, we got back. I did get those lights set up, and that was Saturday afternoon. We'd seen this as a Friday night, so Saturday afternoon, and it had to be Sunday evening. Saturday they were fine. I'd flip them on and you could see the lights there at the tree, and it lit the whole tree area, the bush area, all that stuff lit up. Several of those halogen lights. Sunday evening, I went to flip those lights on, and I couldn't see them. I was kind of like, what? Where did my lights go? Cables connected to the outlet, everything's set up the way it's supposed to be from my end in the house, but this was pretty late at that point when I flipped the light switch to see if they would come on, and I didn't see them. So obviously, being that recent that we had seen this thing just a couple nights before at a tree, the last thing I was going to do was go back out around that tree, and try to figure out what's wrong with the lights. I thought, well, I'll just wait. Those light bulbs, maybe they're cheap and burned out. I'll see tomorrow morning. So Monday morning, my wife got up and I got her off to work. And before I had to go to do my stuff, I went out there and started looking around the tree. Cables there, everything's there. right up in the tree, one of the lights had been pulled up, stake and all. It had been pulled up out of the ground and just tossed to the side. The other light, somebody or something, because it had to be something with a hand, loosened the bolt where you adjust the angle of the light and adjusted the light to where it shone straight up into the air. So basically got rid of the light shining directly into that tree area. Now, there was nobody out there. The lights were working earlier in the evening. I go to flick it on later before I go to bed, and they're not working again. If it had been a human being, that would have been a very stupid, dangerous thing to do. They know they have police officers or professional security people that live in this house, the same at the other end of the ranch, another police officer that lives in the house. These poachers aren't that dumb, is what I'm saying. If they're going out there to poach game or something, that's one thing. That's what they're going to do. They're not going to come up around somebody's home that they sure know is armed and start playing games like that at 11, 12 o'clock at night. That's a guaranteed way to, as I said to my wife before, it's a guaranteed way to win a Darwin Award. You're going to get shot doing something like that. So I don't believe it was a person that did this, but it had to be something with a hand, something loosened that bolt and tilted that light straight up into the air. And even if you work it out in your head and say, well, it could have been some other animal, the other light was just yanked up out of the ground and tossed to the side. That could have been anything. Anything with a mouth and bite on something and pull it up out of the ground. Fine. But whatever did this, it had to have loosened that light and tilted it straight up in the air. And why would it do that? It's almost like it's wanting you to know, somebody's wanting you to know, or something's wanting you to know that what you're doing isn't going to deter it.
That is so creepy. That's pretty bad. You asked a Forestry Service employee if he knew anything about what you had seen. What did he have to say?
We had cowboys on the ranch that worked cattle, and the Forestry Service, they ran a little program out there, in the forested areas of the ranch. It's a big ranch for that area. And they'd every now and then bring forestry students from the university out there to do class work or whatever they do in the forest. I don't know. And I knew, the forestry guy that ran all that stuff out there. He had shown up one afternoon with another gentleman. And, I, again, did not want to tell anybody exactly what we've seen, but I knew he had been in the woods a lot on this ranch and around the area, and I was hoping maybe he had seen something himself big, maybe he'd seen anything that could have explained what we've seen, or maybe a very large bear for this area or something like that. That's what I'm thinking. So I'm talking with him and trying to get him to tell me if he'd seen anything, and it was pretty clear he hadn't himself seen nothing. He kind of ridiculed it, well, what did you see? I said, well, I don't know what I seen. It was pretty, just something pretty big. I started telling him about the floodlights, what had happened over by the tree, and he didn't really say anything himself about it, but the person who was with him said, well, maybe it was a monkey, which it ticked me off when the person said that. First, I'm thinking, you're making fun of me. No. Back in the 20s and 30s, there was some really wealthy people that lived in this area, and they had their own little private airfields, and they'd bring in all these exotic animals, and they'd turn them loose. So it was something that was known in the area. This had happened in the past, and he's saying, well, maybe it was just a monkey that, got loose and then breeding out there. I'm like, no, this wasn't a monkey. But no, they hadn't said anything, and the forestry guy, again, this is somebody who's not been in combat. He's never been, within 3,000 miles of anything really dangerous in his life, but spends his whole life in the forest and thinks he knows everything. And, he kind of got on to me and he's like, well, what's the problem? You had a spotlight, you had a gun, you just shine it down and walk it down, walk up on it. And I knew when he said that, this man had never seen anything like what we've seen that evening. Because the absolute last thing I would have done was walk this thing down, and he wouldn't have either. And neither would anybody else making such a stupid comment like that. So after that one, I just dropped it and didn't bring it up with anybody else, because I knew if I started questioning too many people about this, somehow it would get out there and people would start saying, well, these guys are seeing things, something's wrong with them. So, so I dropped it at that point, didn't say another word to him. Did talk with the cowboy about it, the head cowboy out there, but again, didn't tell him exactly what we seen either.
These experiences are always so hard to talk about. It's a shame.
Yeah, it is.
One night, a little more than a week after you had that encounter, you were on your porch when you heard something that made the hair in the back of your neck stand up. What did you hear?
This is probably about 3 a.m. in the morning. I was in engineering school at the time, studying aerospace engineering, and you do a lot of late nights, and I was working in a couple of labs at that point, and I had a lot of work, so you'd work all night. My wife went to bed hours earlier, and I was sitting at the table doing my stuff. It had been raining pretty hard, and, you know, when it was raining outside, you know, you couldn't go out and really take a cigarette coffee break or anything like that. You get splashed even through the screen, you know, the water would get you all wet. So it stopped raining, and I thought, well, it's after 3, I'll go take a break and go have another cup of coffee and cigarette and come in and wrap everything up for the evening. And I walked out there, and the forest, you know, right after it rains, it smells real good, and, you know, the forest is real quiet. You don't hear any noise or anything, and just real peaceful. Skies have cleared up a little bit, and sitting there having a cigarette, and then all of a sudden I heard it. I mean, the noise, it was so loud, so close. I mean, you know, just a few, I know exactly where it happened. It's just a few hundred yards, off into the wood line behind the house. The hogs, something was getting the group of wild hogs that was out there and infested that land. And whatever it was tearing them to pieces. I mean, this sounded like a slaughter, the noise they were making. And I mean, I've grown up in the woods and mountains my whole life, been around, you know, wild animals and, domesticated animals. And I never heard anything like that just randomly happen, in nature. And it scared me to death. I mean, I immediately put the cigarette down, and this went on for, I'd say a good 30 seconds or so, you know, noise, and then everything went dead silent. You know, another noise, at least from the hogs. And then shortly after that, I heard, all I can describe it is like the extremely loud groaning yell. I mean, that's the best way I can think of to describe it. It was not a coyote sound or anything like what you would expect a wolf to make, I guess is what I'm saying. We had coyotes out there and you'd hear them yapping all the time in the evenings. Definitely wasn't a cat. I mean, I know even mountain lions, for example, or here in Florida they call them panthers. They don't make noises like that. I've heard them before in my life when I was a kid. They sound like women screaming. A completely different thing. Not a bear. Whole different noise there as well. I don't know what this was. I mean, the noise, but it was that loud, and I just knew deep down that this was that thing that it seen. That was the noise it was making. It had just, I guess, slaughtered that group of hogs out there when they put that down. And I mean, the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. Literally, it was that terrifying. I got back in the house, turned the lights off again. I didn't finish up my work for that evening. I got my firearms out. I did not wake my wife up. I just basically sat there the rest of the evening until she got up in the morning. And I did not tell her immediately what I had heard, not because I know if she had heard it, after what we'd seen that evening, we would have had to leave at that point. That wasn't something that was, a good option for us at that time. So I didn't say nothing, but I knew at that point this thing was dangerous, and I was going to have to get proper equipment to deal with it. So, yeah, the discussion came up later when we had to spend some money to buy additional equipment.
Wow, that's a rough night.
Yeah, it was.
You said the hair in the back of your neck stood up, but did it make the hair in your butt stand up? If that didn't, I don't know what would.
Yeah.
But did you ever go out to that area the next day where you heard those sounds coming from?
Yes, I did. And what I was mainly looking for, now at that point again, I didn't have any, additional firepower, just what I had prior, but I felt I was still nervous, but I felt comfortable enough that it was daylight, and I was armed. I had a 45, and I had a shotgun with me with that 12 gauge slugs. So I was confident enough, maybe overconfident, now looking back on it, that I could go out there and nothing would get me in the afternoon like that. And I knew I had been out in that area prior and had seen where those hogs had been bedded down. So I kind of had a good idea of where to start looking, and I was looking more for prints. I was still trying to find footprints from whatever this thing was. That's what I went over there to look for, and could not, because, their hogs, I guess, had tore the area up so bad you couldn't really make heads or tails of prints within there. If you've ever seen a large group of hogs and what they do to an area, they tear it all up, and it's just a mess. So I couldn't really make out any prints in it, but there was blood everywhere. There was no hogs. I didn't see any hogs in there. I didn't see any pieces of the hogs, but there was blood everywhere inside of that place they'd been bedding down. And that scared me really bad.
Oh, I'll bet it did. After you had that encounter, you'd go on the back deck and smoke from time to time. When you would, you said you'd hear things in the woods. Please tell us more about that.
Yeah, you'd hear movement. You always hear stuff in the woods. Anybody who's lived out in the sticks knows this. Animals make noises, all of them, even the small ones, something like here in Florida, we have armadillos, possums, a lot of possums and armadillos and raccoons. But, even something like an armadillo, walking through the brush, back in the tree line, on the dead leaves, it sounds loud. And a lot of times it sounds louder than what you're actually looking at making the noise. So it's not unheard of to hear sounds, but you can always shine a sound like that down. If you got a light, it's not a problem. Shine, if you play around a little bit, you'll figure out what's making noise. This wasn't that kind of noise. It was too loud. And, or to me, when I'm listening, trying to listen, it just sounded too loud. It didn't sound like a deer, didn't sound like, any kind of animal like that. It just sounded like a person walking the tree line. And I would sit there with that spotlight and shine in the tree line and try to catch what's making that noise. If there's a deer or something, you'd see it immediately, which I did all the time. But this, whatever was making that noise, it was like it was trying to avoid being seen in the light, which is unusual for an animal at night. And I personally believe whatever it was hiding behind the trees. So after that happened that evening and I heard the pigs get slaughtered, I had to bring it up with my wife because I knew I was going to have a bigger firearm to deal with this thing if it was coming back near our house. I was not confident with the weapons I had at the time. I knew, again, that if I could get it right in the face with the M4, I believed I could have took it down with that at close range. But I didn't want to be that close, and I wasn't convinced. As scared as I had been the last time when I seen it, I wasn't convinced that I would be able to make that shot. So after that happened that evening with the hogs, I realized this thing is dangerous, even if it didn't attack us. If it can do that to a pack of hogs that are vicious themselves in nature and obviously be big enough to carry off the carcass, this thing was nothing to play around with. So I got in touch with a friend of mine that I'd worked with overseas. He was big into hunting, and he had done the whole safari thing in Africa several times, big game guy, and that's what he liked to do. So I talked with him, and I didn't tell him what we had seen, just told him it was something really big and what his suggestion would be to deal with that. And of course he said, well, in Florida, you shouldn't have anything. So I said, well, I don't know. Maybe somebody bred it up out here, raised something that ain't supposed to be here or whatever. And he told me, he said, well, he would recommend 300 Win Mag. He said, I've taken them on safari. He said, they'll take down anything that's in North America. He said, Florida. He said, there's nothing living in Florida that you need a weapon that big for. So he said, you should be fine with that. So on his advice, talked to my wife and I told her, I said, look, we're going to either have to move out of here, which is going to look bad on us, considering who owns the ranch and who these people are. It would look bad on us if we just up and leave, a few months into this gig. So I need to spend the money. We're going to have to buy another weapon. and I bought a Winchester 300 Magnum and full kit. When I had it ordered and picked up from the gun store down there, I was getting the eyebrows raised again. The people, well, what do you need something that big for? It's too big for anything in this area. Like I've never hunted before in my life and don't know that myself. And I was not going to tell anybody what we've seen. So once I got that back home, started a several week routine where I'd wait for my wife to go to bed. And once I was done with my stuff, I would cut the lights off there in the kitchen and open the two big dining room windows. And I'd set the rifle up and I'd sit there and wait, had a little night scope, and would just keep an eye on that tree. And I was hoping, that this thing would come back up. And I felt confident. Now, after speaking with you, I don't know if what I was doing was a good idea or not, but I felt confident at the time that with the 300 Winnie, if I could get it in the crosshairs, especially at that range, and take a shot, I'd knock it down, regardless of where I hit it, as long as it's in the upper torso area. That should do the trick. I did that for several weeks afterwards in the evening, all my free time, and of course it never came back to the tree. I never got a shot at it. Now looking back on it, maybe it was my way of trying to deal with the fact that it had scared us and scared me so bad the first night I seen it. I just didn't like being scared like that. I've never been scared of really anything like that to that level of fear. And I think this was maybe my way of, trying to convince myself that, this is just an animal, what you've seen, and there's no reason to be that afraid of it. And, you're a human being, you're smarter than this thing. Just get proper tool and you take care of it. And that's probably what that was about more than anything else, looking back on it.
I'm so glad you never got a chance to fire around at this thing, because I don't think that would have gone too well.
After you told me what you told me, I started thinking about it, and that's kind of a scary thought as well.
It is. Do you know if there are any Native American burial grounds near that ranch?
Well, on the ranch itself, I know that now this is Central Florida, or North Central Florida. It's very flat. This is cattle country, we got woods, but it's very, very flat land. Near the exit of the ranch, the front end, me and my wife had discussed this in the past, wondering what these things were. There were these big mounds, and they just look out of place. Now, what they are, I have no idea. I never asked. When I was there, never thought about asking. Indian mounds are pretty common in Florida, especially in north central Florida and the Panhandle area. Indian mounds are a pretty common feature, so I never thought about asking on the ranch. I do know for a fact, though, that the ranch owners and their children, and even some of the people that worked on the ranch in the farming areas, that these people had always been finding Indian arrowheads, and that was a pretty common occurrence there on the ranch when they were out planting watermelon or whatever, to find arrowheads. So I know there was an Indian presence on the ranch, prior to Europeans moving into the area. And it had probably been for a while, and I never thought about that until you asked me about the Indian mounds. Noticing those things on the ranch, I never even gave that a second thought. I just assumed it's some kind of odd, geological feature, but now that you brought it up, and the arrowheads and everything else, it's very possible that those were Indian mounds there on that ranch.
I wouldn't be surprised if those were. Would you describe that Dogman's head you and your wife saw that night as being more canine-like or more like a baboon's?
This is the thing. Me and my wife really, and we've seen the same thing. I'm trying to get her to tell me independently of me telling her what she's seen, and she described the same thing I know I seen. Wolf-like, I guess, is the way you would describe it, but not necessarily like our German Shepherd. Yeah, me and my wife have discussed the head, and the best way to describe it is wolf-like, not necessarily, though, like our German Shepherd. She's described it the best way as our German Shepherd. When you're looking at her head, face on, straight forward, when you're looking at her head, her muzzle is more narrow. What we seen was wolf-like or dog-like, but it was more oval-shaped. I guess more heart-shaped, maybe, oval-shaped. I don't know how you describe that, heart-shaped, I guess. And the snout was blunter. wasn't as long and narrow necessarily as Nora's snout proportionally. I guess it's what I'm trying to say, proportionally to the head. It's still snout. There was a snout there, just not proportionally maybe as narrow and long as Nora's. That's the best way to describe the actual head. It was definitely wolf-like. And ears, it is the thing, ears were just like almost identical to Nora's ears. They were very pointy, looked like ears on a German Shepherd.
Yeah, from the way you describe it, it sure sounds to me like it was, in fact, a canine-type Dogman instead of a Type 3. Type 3s have hominid-style legs, whereas a canine type, of course, they have canine-style legs. Not to shake you up, but have you and your wife ever considered the possibility that Dogman you saw wasn't alone?
I had never thought about that until you asked me. Looking back on it now, it's possible that there were more in that area. I mean, it was such an overwhelming thing to see just one. That was enough for me and her. There didn't have to be any more. This thing was so big and so terrifying. The thought of, well, is there multiple things? No, it didn't even cross my mind until you brought it up. That would be really terrifying to encounter something like that, more than one of them.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I know your wife was really shaken up by that encounter the two of you had, but how's she dealing with it now?
I mean, I think after you spoke with her, she's a little better. I mean, she did like what you told her about Montana, not being as prone to these kind of things, stuff like that. So that set her at ease maybe a little there, but I guess she thought about it. She was discussing it with me, what you said. Yeah, if the thing really wanted to get you, if it really wanted to get us that night, it probably could have. So maybe that wasn't what it's wanting to do. I guess. I think I was affected more by it than even she was. I mean, as far as interrupting what I, did in my life, because I just never could go outside after dark again, and I was looking forward to enjoying that on the ranch. I had bought a pretty nice telescope, hooked up to the computer and everything, and was planning on, spending a lot of nights out there stargazing, with that. It was a hobby of mine, and no light pollution, in that area was a great thing I was looking forward to. And I never got a chance to do that after we've seen this thing that evening. I would not go back out in the evening, especially not with a telescope.
Yeah, Dogman encounters do tend to put the kibosh on outdoor activities like that at night. Well, Jay, it's about time for us to get out of here, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Just, if you see something like this, you're not alone. There are other people that see it. Not everybody that's seeing something like this is crazy. I've heard a lot of people talking about hunting these things, and after speaking with you prior to this phone call, you start questioning again, what are these things? Is it a legitimate animal that's just native to this part of the world and for whatever reason has been stealthy enough, sly enough to escape detection? I find that hard to believe, personally, but, is it possible? Okay, I guess so. Depending on the intelligence of these things, if they have a high enough IQ, maybe they can successfully avoid being detected by us. Or is it paranormal? Is it something else? And this is the question, I have after seeing it. I seen something that shouldn't be there. I mean, we've got, I've looked into this. We have things in the recent past, and I mean, chronologically, the recent past, I'm saying, past 10, 15,000 years, we've had large, half canine or half dog. They actually call them dog bears. I can't pronounce the correct name for them, but they're called dog bears or bear dogs, I believe. These were these large, just what it sounds like, dog, bear-sized, wolfish dogs. I don't know what you'd call them. They were native to the United States at one time. Now, could it be one of these things that's just escape detection? People are saying possibly, but I mean, it's just an animal. At the end of the day, you would think these things would be easy to find. So I guess what I'm saying is that's the one thing I find hard to believe, that unless these things are, smarter than great apes, they have to be smarter than that. It kind of blows my mind that we wouldn't have found them already. So it makes me lean towards something that I'm not really comfortable leaning towards, as a person of science and engineering, not comfortable leaning towards the paranormal for an explanation of these things, but it makes you start grappling with those kind of questions, are these things paranormal? And if it's paranormal, then I don't know how to deal with something like that. What tool do you use? What tools do we have at our disposal to deal with something like this? It's definitely not anything man-made. So it makes me uncomfortable even thinking about that. And I would probably, advise the people that have seen these things or having an encounter themselves, around their home, if their situation like me and my wife were in, maybe you ought to think twice about taking a hunting rifle and going and looking for them. I never really thought about it from this point of view until I spoke with you, and that may not be the best idea.
Well said. Yeah, for the people who have tried taking up arms and firing at these things, it normally didn't work out all that well for them, so I think you're on to something. Well, Jay, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and telling us about that experience. I really do appreciate it.
No problem, Vic. Thanks for having me, and this really did help me and my wife deal with this.
Well, you're welcome. I'm so glad it helped. Well, have a great night, okay?
Yeah, you too, Vic.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.